I'm ready. Okay, today's breakfast and shir was sponsored Le'ilu Nishmas Pinchas David ben Avram Alav Hashalom and Neshama Shav and Aliyah, and everyone should enjoy the breakfast. He would have wanted you to. Okay, I'm going to continue now in what we were talking about Ruach Hakodesh and Nevuah and the likes, Bizman Hazeh. Now, I want to start off with a one-line opening from a tshuva from the Ohr Hachaim, and then really open up that tshuva to everything that it's talking about, everything that's really included in it. Now, you have to know the Kaiseres, the titles in the tshuvas of the Ohr Hachaim, were mostly not written by him. They were written by his Einikel, the first Bab V'Rav, actually, who was the organizer of the Ohr Hachaim, and he wrote the Shaila as follows. Shaila. This is in the Ohr Hachaim, in Yeridei, Chelik Beis, Tshuva Kofei. Here's the lashon of the Shaila, and then we'll open it up. The Shaila says like this: Melamed Echad. There was a Melamed, a teacher. Paga b'chvoid ha'Ohr Hachaim Zal. He was pageya in the covet of the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh. Va'amar shelo yasa sefer b'Ruach Hakodesh. And he said that the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh did not write his sefer with Ruach Hakodesh. Question mark. That's the question. That's the beginning, the end, that's the line of the question. And the tshuva is going to be a whole tshuva of Ruach Hakodesh. Now I want to just open this up a little bit, open this up into a few different windows, and then we'll come back to this Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh. Now, the Alta Skver Rebbe used to say that the first Chassidish sefer ever written was by the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh. Now, the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh was born in the late 1600s in Salah, in Morocco. He never met a chassid in his entire life. He grew up in Salah. He was part of the famous Ben Attar family, which was like an elite, wealthy, and rabbinic family in Morocco. It was a terrible time to be alive in Morocco at that time for everybody. There was hungers, there was wars. The family moved from Fez to Salah to Saneh, back, forth. It was a mess. It wasn't easy to be there. The Ohr Hachaim, as a young child, was like a child prodigy. He was brilliant. Everybody saw that. As a young boy, he got married to his cousin. I don't know how close of a cousin, but a cousin. He married the daughter of Reb Moshe ibn Attar, who was a cousin of his. His Rebbe was Reb Chaim ibn Attar Hazaken. A lot of Ibn Attars. It was a very big, prominent Moroccan family. He learned by Reb Chaim ibn Attar Hazaken. He married into his cousin's family, Reb Moshe ibn Attar. Now, he married. Interestingly, Stam, this is just like an interesting historical tidbit. The Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh had two wives. He married. Moroccans did not have the Reb Chaim Rabbeinu Gershon. He married one wife, the daughter of the Reb Moshe ibn Attar. That marriage was unfruitful. He had no children, and after 10 years, he took another wife. He married another wife, and they all lived together, a happy blended family. He had two wives and children from his second marriage. Even when he moved up to Yerushalayim, he traveled through Italy and came to Yerushalayim, he kept both wives. So the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh, interestingly, had two wives, meaning this is into the relatively modern era, into the mid-1700s. That's just not connected to our story. The Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh in Morocco, strangely, had it very, very hard. His shver, the Reb Moshe ibn Attar, at some point became very close to the king, to Ibram, whatever his name was, Ibram something, who made him the parnas of the Jews. Now, what would happen there is was like a vicious cycle. You'd become close to the king, you'd get hurt by the king, close, hurt, close, and basically the Reb Moshe ibn Attar lost everything that he had. He was sentenced to death, then he was pardoned from his death, but all his money was taken, then he was put back up on his perch, then he lost it again. It was a very rocky type of shteller to have. Ultimately, he has a heart attack in his 40s, and he dies. And with that, the glory era of the Ibn Attar family grinds to an end. The Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh loses his parnasa, and there was it seems like a small shul, like a machsan almost, that the Ibn Attar family owned b'shutfis with the Bibas family, and they developed a huge Yerusha fight, and the Bibas family wanted someone from their family to be the darshan, and the Ibn Attar family wanted the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh to be the darshan in the shul. They fought, they kicked him out, a lot of Rabbanim were against him. Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh, they wrote terrible things about him, he just wants to just wants to speak, he's not interested in it. The Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh had it very, very difficult in Morocco. The Moroccans didn't love him. It's interesting. The Moroccans, where he came from, they didn't love him. Until the Kach, that Gracie Rebbes commented that the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh was such a heilige neshama, such a unique and prized heilige neshama that the Sitra Achra made special effort to destroy him, to demoralize him, so that he surrounded him by constant metach and fighting, on his home territory. Even to very late, the Shineveh, the Ohr Hachaim's son, the Shineveh, when he visited Eretz Yisrael in the late, 1800s, he was there for the yahrzeit of the Ohr Hachaim. Today, if you're there for the yahrzeit of the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh, you'll see thousands of people in Har Zeisim. He was there and he said, "There's nobody here. Well, what's going on? Why doesn't anybody come?" And he says his biruli that he comes from the Sfardim, and by the Sfardim he wasn't so chal, and Memela, like no one comes to the grave. This is what the Shinaveh writes. So what's, so to speak, saved the Ohr Hakodesh is that the Ohr Hakodesh on his way to Eretz Yisrael as a young man in his like high 30s, Ohr Hakodesh didn't live very long. He lived only, I think he died before 50. Ohr Hakodesh died in his 40s. As a young man in his 30s, he was traveling up to Eretz Yisrael. He stopped in Livorno in Italy, which was a big publishing city, and he had the opportunity to publish some of his Sfarim. And he published, his first sefer was Chefetz Hashem on Mesechtas, and then his second sefer was the Ohr Hakodesh on Chumash. Now, the Ohr Hakodesh writes himself in the Akdama that he had voluminous amounts of Torah on Chumash. Endless, reams and reams, endless amount of Torah to publish on Chumash, but there's only so much you could publish, and he whittled it down and to the best pieces and only the most important pieces. Ohr Hakodesh is not a small sefer today, but he whittled it down. It's his finest collection from amongst his collections, and he published it in Livorno, in I don't know, call it 1725, 1730 or something like that. Now, a young man who was a up-and-coming star, a Rebbe, in Mamish, in the backwaters of Ukraine, fell in love with this sefer, felt it to be a beautiful, beautiful sefer. That young man's name was the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov spoke incredible things about the Ohr Hakodesh's neshama and where he comes from and who he was, and said incredible things about him. And because of that, the Sefer Ohr Hachaim caught on amongst the Chassidim, the early Chassidim, and ripples and ripples and ripples till the point where the Chidah, who doesn't live that long after him, because the Chidah is a Talmud of his in Eretz Yisrael, writes that my Rebbe, the Ohr Hakodesh's sefer, it's a very good sefer, it's an amazing sefer, but I heard Shamati that the Polanya, the Russia, they were madvasid several more times on their own, and it's become, Nachlas HaTzibur, a very chashuv thing, and it's all because Harav Yisrael Baal Shem was mechav of the sefer and really loved it. So the Baal Shem Tov adopted the Ohr Hakodesh as the first Chassidish sefer, as a sefer that's central to Chassidus and to Chassidicism, and wanted everybody to learn it. And amongst his early Talmidim, there's all sorts of quotes about what they said. Like someone who learns Ohr Hakodesh, Lamashal, the Rishner was supposedly said that back in the day, Zohar, learning Zohar, even if you didn't understand what it meant, was good for your neshama. Now, learning Ohr Hakodesh, even if you don't understand it, it's good for your nefesh. The others said it's a school for your shemayim, it's a school to not die without doing tshuva. There's endless amounts of rhetorical things that different Grace Rebbe said about Sefer Ohr Hakodesh that catapulted it into the highest level of Sefer, to the point where today it's really Chumash, Rashi, Ramban, Ohr Hakodesh. It's probably the hierarchy of Chumash Svarim. Possibly Ohr Hakodesh even before Ramban. Maybe it's easier. Maybe there's a little bit of something there for everyone, because Ohr Hakodesh has it's a blend of Pshat, Rosh, Remes, Soyd. It's a little bit of everything. So Ohr Hakodesh was catapulted up to the highest levels of Sefer's acceptance, and was published many, many times since then on the Chumash, off the Chumash, as its own Sefer, with Pirushim, with other, the Pirushim. Ohr Hakodesh became something extremely, extremely chashiv, thanks to the Baal Shem Tov's commitment to the Ohr Hachaim. Now, Baal Shem Tov, because he was so committed to the Ohr Hakodesh, he desperately wanted to meet him. And there's a legend in the Chassidish world that the Baal Shem Tov sent his brother-in-law, Rav Gershon of Kittiv, who was a Talmud Chacham, a famous Talmud Chacham, Musmach of the brother Klois. He learned B'chavrusa with the Noid Yehuda. There's a few tshuvas in Noid Yehuda that are written to Rav Gershon Kittiv. Baal Shem Tov sent Rav Gershon Kittiv up to Eretz Yisrael to meet him. And now here's where it splits off, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. I really want to get to where we're going, but here's what splits off. There's a letter that was found in the Charsana Geniza, it was called. In 1918, a whole tranche of letters of Kisvei Yadus was discovered. Basically, the provenance, the backstory that was given to this, find was that the Baal Shem left over things that went to the Maggid Mizrich, that went to his son Rav Avraham HaMalach, that went to his son, whose name I forget the second, that went to his son, his daughter's son, Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin. Now, we know that Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin was greatly persecuted by the Russian government. When he ran away, they confiscated all his documents and all his Kisvei Yadus and everything he had left behind. And in 1818, during the revolution, a archive somewhere in Kharson, we don't even know where or what that means, was raided, and this entire thing of Kisvei Yadus was produced, and this mamish took over the market. It was the hottest thing. They sold it. Some Seif, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rashab, was able to buy most of it. People bought it for him, and in Chabad has most of it today. They lost some of it in the Second World War, but a lot of it is still in Crown Heights today. The Charsana Geniza, they consider it to be the pride and joy of their collection. It's authentic. It's everything's the best. L'maisa, a lot of Talmidei Chachamim and scholars and everyone in between felt that the Chassidus Geniza is full of frauds. It's a fake collection. If you want to read more about it in Yeshurun and I think volume Chaf Gimel, it's like a whole section. You could read. There's a lot to read. Someone from Bnei Brak, Rabbi David Tzvi Hillman, published a sefer called Igris Ba'al Tanya Bnei Deirei, and in the back he has a whole maracha proving all the frauds. There's a lot of details here that are certainly fraudulent. Now, amongst this oisif of fake kisvayadis, I think the consensus is that fake kisvayadis is a letter from Rabbi Gershon Kittiver in the year 1742, writing that he met the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh, writing to his brother-in-law the Baal Shem Tov that he met the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh, and he told him this, and he told him that, or whatever. Now, the problem is, and this the Kli Chemder of Meir Dan Plutsky pointed out, is that we know that the Rabbi Gershon of Kittiver was not in Eretz Yisrael in that year, because he was involved in a major fight over a get with the brother Klois, and he's involved in the writing back and forth, and those letters are dated, and some of them are even published in mainstream Tshuva Svarim, and he was clearly involved. The government was involved, he was subpoenaed, he was maybe arrested. It's clear that he wasn't in Eretz Yisrael during that time, to which the truthers say that no, he made a quick trip, like a blitz, like a little quick trip to Eretz Yisrael, and then came back to Brody, which if you know how travel was in those days is highly, highly unlikely, and whatever. So this is what, in any case, this is a fake letter. There is a real letter from 2 years later when Rabbi Gershon Kittiver actually went to Eretz Yisrael, when the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh was already nifter, where he writes that he got here and the Ohr Hachaim is not alive anymore, but people told him different things about the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh, and he does write some things about the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh, and probably based on that is how the fake one, developed. But in any case, the Baal Shem Tov had this special relationship with the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh. Now, this special relationship that the Chassidim had with the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh came to a head in this tshuva that the Divrei Chaim is referring to. Now, the Divrei Chaim is a one-line hakdama. There was a Malamed who said this. It happens to be that recently they discovered that we don't have the tshuva, we only have the shaila, but in a booklet of shailas that was sent to Reb Shlomo Kluger, the Rav of Brod, who is a contemporary of the Divrei Chaim, we have the shaila that tells us the story. It's like a 2-page shaila that describes the story. And it says, there was a sheikhit in town who was a misnagid. And this is a town in Ukraine, I forget the name now. He was a misnagid, and the olim in the town was becoming chassidish. They were chassidim of the Stefan Eshter, the Rishon's son, the rebbe of the Rebbe's. Well, I think it's his father, but the grandfather of the Rebbe's, let's call him. In a spiritual way. And the chassidim were they didn't like this sheikhit very much, and they got into a whole discussion with him, and he was saying things about, like he was hacking them at being chassidish because there's so many things from Rishonim, from Achronim, from Katmonim that are not like what you're doing. Why are you changing things? And they were maching avek all those earlier gedolim, and in defense of those earlier gedolim, he was maching avek their heroes. And he said, somehow it came to the conversation about things that are written Ruach Hakodesh, not written Ruach Hakodesh. Or they said that their rebbes, or everything they said is Ruach Hakodesh, so they could argue on whatever. And he said, that's not true. It's Chachmas HaTorah. Whatever they write, it's Chachmas HaTorah. Would you say that even about the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh, that just Chachmas HaTorah, not Ruach HaKodesh? He says, yes, the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh was, what he said is the Ohr Hachaim HaKadosh had Ruach HaKodesh, but the Sefer is written with Chachmas HaTorah. This was all they needed. They contacted the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said that this is a fireable offense, get rid of the Sheikhet. And then they took it a step further, and they said, even chayvis that we owe you, that we didn't pay you for the last year for different things, that gets wiped away with this offense also. And this sheikhit was crying out for help, and the Malamed in the town, who I guess was also a Litvak, took his side and started bringing rayas from Chazals and from a Drush Zaran and from other Svarim that there's nothing wrong with saying that the Sefer wasn't written Ruach HaKodesh. And the Malamed got in trouble. They fired him too. And now the Malamed wrote a letter to Shlomo Kluger saying, Hatzileni na miyad roizfai. Like what's going on over here? They're being Tailan, they're Rebbes, they're making up all sorts of things over here. Save me, save the Sheikhet, save us all from what's going on over here. Now, unfortunately, we do not have the tshuva of Shlomo Kluger that he wrote back. The tshuva is lost, or at least unpublished. What we have is that the Divrei Chaim, when he starts his tshuva here, before he says the answer, the Divrei Chaim says, and you wrote to me that they got a psak from the Gedolei Hadar, that it's okay what these guys said, and I'm going to come to smash that. So it's implicit, al kapanim, in the tshuva from the Divrei Chaim, that Shlomo Kluger's answer was in support of this sheikhet and this malamed, and saying that it was acceptable what they were saying. Now, that's the backstory to this one-liner that I think Chayevav. No. It's 100 years later. This is 100 years later. But that's the backstory of this one-liner heading of this tshuva. Now let's try to see what the answer to the shaila is. So I just want to share a few of the I guess the pertinent chazals, the Gemaras, and then the Divrei Chaim will read much easier with all the background information. So we mentioned this yesterday, last week, briefly. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, and Dafid Aleph Min Aleph says, Mishameisu Nevi'im Achronim Chagi Zechariah Malachim Nistalku Ruach Hakodesh Yisrael. When the Nevi'im Achronim Chagi Zechariah Malachim died, Ruach Hakodesh was instalic from Klal Yisrael. The Afal Pikein Hoyim Mishtamshim Bebasko. They would still be Mishtamsh Bebasko. Then the Gemara tells us, and this is a very important detail that keeps popping up when you talk about Ruach Hakodesh and the Nevuah B'zman Hazeh. The Gemara says they were sitting, Yatsa Basko Min Hashemayim, and it says, Yesh Kan Echad, there's a person over here, Shiroi Shetishra of Shechina, K'Moshe Rabbeinu. There's a person here who's Roi, the Shechina should be sharing him, like Moshe Rabbeinu. Ela She'ein Deirei Zakoy Lekach. Nasnu Chacham Meneim Behillel Azaken. Ochshemeis, Amrulav, Hai Chassid, Hai Anav, Hai whatever. Meaning, the Gemara brings a few of these such stories where Baskel came out and said, so-and-so was Roi, that she have Ruach HaKodesh. I'm not Ruach HaKodesh, Shetishra of Shechina K'Moshe Rabbeinu, which means like Nevuah, Mamash highest level Nevuah. But the Dar is not Zeichen. Now, what's implicit in this Gemara is that, first of all, there's levels. The Gemara says, the Baskel said, Roy, that it should be K'Moshe Rabbeinu. But the Dar is not Roy for that. The Mashmayis is that, okay, there's other levels. It could be some sort of Hashrayis Hashchina on this person, that's a lower level. And V'oid, the Gemara is pretty clear that even L'achar Bittul Nevuah, we're talking about after Chagi Zechariah Malachai are gone, still there are people that are somewhat in the realm of Nevuah, meaning, because these are contrast Gemaras. The Gemara says, Mesu Batla, but there was these Baskels that kept saying so-and-so, so-and-so. So you see this idea already that even though Nevuah, like highest level Nevuah, real proper Nevuah, is gone, there still is a makom to talk about some sort of Ashrayis Zechina. Now, even more explicitly than this is a famous Gemara, the Gemara of Basra, and Yud Beis and Beis, Yud Beis and Aleph and Yud Beis and Beis, says, Amar Rav Dimi de Ben Chaifa, Rav Dimi de Ben Chaifa said, Miyoyim Shechar Beis HaMikdash, Nitn al-Nevuim and Nevi'im, V'nitn al-Chachamim. Nevuah was taken from the Nevi'im and was given to the Chachamim. So the Gemara asks right away, Atu Chachamim don't have their own Schus Kiyim, they need the Nevuah of the Nevi'im. Chachamim are on their own, Roi Lekach. The Gemara says, Minit L'Bami, the Gemara fine. Then the Gemara says, how do you know this? The Gemara says, Teida, I'll bring you a proof that this is true, that the Chachamim still have some Nevuah, let's say. At least that's how a lot of the Rishonim learn the Gemara. Teida, I'll bring you a proof. The Amar Gavar Rabba Milsa, a Chacham will say something, Umis Amr Mishmei the Gavar Rabba Achrina Kavasei. And a previous Gavar Rabba will have said the same thing as him. And how could it be that you're Mechavan to Kveger? How could it be you're Mechavan to Taisvis? Meaning, they were much bigger than us. Elamai, there's a certain amount of Nevuah that's in the Chacham's things. The Gemara says, Amarava, my Koshya, maybe they both share the mazel, meaning in this regard, in this hara of Torah, this chus of Torah, they both share this. Elamai, Teida, the Amri Gavar Rabba Milsa, Masam Msheder, Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef, Kavasei. You say it, and Rabbi Akiva already said it. No one's the mazel of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is way too big. The Gemara says, maybe Chach, in this little regard, you're the same as Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara says, no, people say like Moshe Rabbeinu. People can be mechavan to halachah and mishinai u'misamar kavasei. They're like Moshe Rabbeinu. That you can't be mechavan to unless it's a certain nevuah. And the Gemara says maybe dilma kesuma mamashrish b'arvovia. It's just like a blind man feeling his way around. And sometimes you bump into something that's true. No, because when they say it b'taima. You listen to a shir and the person says it with a svara, with a tam, and turns out he's mechavan to something from a kadman, from Moshe Rabbeinu. In that case, that can't be. Elamai, there's a certain mas nevuah that still exists. Now there's a machlekes how to learn this Gemara. There are achronim that learn this Gemara that means the chachma of the chachamim wasn't nisvatel. Meaning when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, nevuah of the neviim was taken away, but the chachma of chachamim remained. But the pashtus of the Gemara is that the Gemara seems to be saying that nevuah, or some level of nevuah, was taken from the neviim and given over to the chachamim, who now maintain a certain level of this nevuah, of this access to nevuah. Now that would be colloquially referred to as Ruach Hakodesh, because it's not a nevuah. It's not a person you could ask him, where's I lost something, where can I find it? He can't tell you the answer to that, which if you look at the Nevi'im by Shmuel and other Nevi'im, they're able to tell you Masha B'chayrin and Masha B'stak, and they can tell you what's in your pockets. So it's not a Navi, but it's a Baal Ruach HaKodesh, someone who clearly has some sort of understanding or havana of things that are deeper, that are less available. That's what this Gemara in Basra and the Gemara in Sanhedrin seem to be pointing us to. Now, because of this, and through this, there are many occurrences, of Ruach HaKodesh and Nevuah in the Gemara. The Gemara says many times, Ba'is Shah, Nemer Kim in Ruach HaKodesh, Rav Gamliel, the Gemara in Eruvin. There's many midrashim. There's a Zayar that says Gimel Shalu Ruach HaKodesh. There's many different sources, even stretching through to the Rishonim. Last week we quoted from Rav Ezra Hanavi and Hanavi Mimun Kater. There's another Navi. There's we also the Ravid famously. I'll just say this: the Ravid famously in a few different places. The Ravid, the Magia and the Rambam, Yena Ravid writes. He writes it, the most famous time he writes it is by Ashayel and Hilchos Lulav, where the Maggid Mishnah discusses it and the Kappas Marim discusses it. But the Ravid writes that he's arguing the Rambam, and he says, Kvar mefnim shanim, many years ago, it was Sharsa Ruach Hakodesh b'beis Midrashenu. Like there was Ruach Hakodesh in our beis Medrash, and we paskin this shaila not like the Rambam, and Mela like this is wrong. To which the Magid Mishnah, the Kesef Mishnah, and the Kappas Morim, all right, okay. Terei Labashmayim. It's a machlekes like any other machlekes. Similarly, the Ravid in Hilchos Shchita in a sugi of Treifus writes Herolanu Seid Min Hashemayim, that kach v'kach is the din. To which the Rosh, not too long after him in Chulin writes, Umikivan shesamach be'mumchasei b'yadav, since the Ravid was samech on his mumchas and his feel with his hands, that's how he paskin, but we're going to paskin differently. So you see, he mamish discounts the entire Seid Min Hashemayim, and he just says the Ravid was a big expert in Treifus. But, we don't hold like the Ravid per se in this. But you find this creeping up, this type of language, meaning a zichar in the Gemara that we're quoting. But even in later Rishonim, you'll see this type of language creeping up. Now this is the Ruach HaKodesh that we're discussing here. Now, I think when I say Ruach HaKodesh, I think most people think Ruach HaKodesh like that you go to someone who's sitting with a talis over his head, and you ask him, should I invest in A or B? And without looking up, he blurts out B, and you do that. That's the Ruach HaKodesh I think most people are thinking that we're referring to. That's not really what I'm talking about here. We'll try to get to that if we can, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Ruach HaKodesh that's described in Chazal, that's described in the Rishonim, which almost always, as far as I know, has to do with learning, with psak, with the ability to be yerid la'imka shel davar, meaning to, sometimes you look oftentimes you look at svarim of people from before, from decades ago, from Rishonim, from Acharonim, you'll say like, how in the world did one man, sometimes these people lived 40, 30, 40, 50 years. How in the world did a Yilud Basar, did a Yilud Isha, Karetz Mechaimer, do this? That's the Ruach HaKodesh that I'm referring to. The ability to be Mechaven Lamita Shel Torah, even when the odds are so stacked against you. And Rishonim who were busy being persecuted, who had their families massacred, who were still able to be Yerid L'Umka, of brachas through Uktzin and leave behind Taisvis. When the Rambam, who writes about how Amus B'avodah he was, how Pashid, beaten and broken, didn't have time to open a sefer all week, was able to write something that's kol teru inside of it. When the Ramah, who lived, according to different Neschayos, 42, 48, 52, lived a short amount of time, was able to paskin psak, halach l'maisa for derei deris. When the Beis Yosef rather lived a long, happy life, not happy, but who lived a long life, into his 90s, but was able to write a Kesef Mishnah and a Beis Yosef and a Shulchan Aruch, and I'm talking about that type of Ruach HaKodesh Shachera. Now, this is encapsulated in a famous quote by the Urim V'Tumim. The Tumim, Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz, in his Kitzer Takvikayin, in Ois Kuf Chaf Gimel, or Kuf Chaf Daled, he writes as follows. There's a sugya, something called Kimli. The halacha is that if there's many days, but the halacha, let's say there's a machlekes Rishonim, but the consensus among the Rishonim is to paskin A. Now it's primarily in Choshen Mishpat, to paskin A. But you're able to source that there's a Rashba or a Rambam or a Rif, a Deya, Chashuva, that holds differently. You're allowed to say, Kimli, I hold like that Deya. I'm not sure, but the paskin like the consensus. This is a totally acceptable opinion. I paskin like that acceptable opinion. Says the Tumim, a Deya that's not brought down in Shulchan Aruch, meaning it exists. It could be a Rashba, it could be a Rambam, it could be whatever, but it's not brought down in Shulchan Aruch. A person cannot say Kimli like that Deya. Says the Tumim why, and I want to read you his language. It's beautiful. The Tumim writes as follows. He says, he says, Ein Safik, ki hakol b'ksav miyad Hashem hiskel al yadam. Everything that was written in the Shulchan Aruch was written, Hashem was guiding their hands. Ki kushis rabbis shehikshu aleim achronim. There's many bam bekashis that the achronim asked. V'tirtzu b'derech charif v'amuk. They had these very creative and sharp answers to explain these answers. And likewise, in their short and sweet language, the Mechaber and the Ramah were able to be kailul many dinim, woven into a few words. And here's the punchline. Listen to these words. He says, "Ein safek." He says, "It's pashit. She'ein sheloi kivnu lahakol." They could not have been mechaven to all of this. The Ramah, the Mechaber, they were not being mechaven to everything. Every lamda shetaz that turns the sugya on its head and spins it 7 ways. That's not what the Ramah meant. He could not have been mechaven to that when he was writing it. He says, how is it possible, because of all the work that they had, that they would be able to do this? Who is the man? Who's a human? And this is the Yonasan Eibshitz, who's I would say a tier 1 genius, like a genius for generations, a tier 1 genius who himself wrote svarim on many different tchumim in Torah, B'roiv Oimek, B'roiv B'kiyas, B'roiv Oimek, and did not have an easy life. He was being persecuted himself. Like, you're talking about a tier 1 genius who's writing this. It's impossible, he says. Rak, Ruach Hashem, Noisisa B'kirbam, Lias l'shaynim mechuven lahalacha b'li kavanas hakaisev. V'chayfetz Hashem b'yad matzliach. It was Elamai, they had Ruach Hakodesh. There was a Ruach Hakodesh that was helping them when they were writing this. They, through their commitment to Torah and their Avodah and their Hasmada and their Limud, got to the point where they were ready to do this. But of course, it's impossible to do this perfectly, to do it exactly right. There was a Ruach HaKodesh that was sharing on them, that guided their hand, that allowed them to do this. So, Chas v'shalom lemer kimli neged acharis mechav ramah. This is what the Tum writes, and this is Halacha L'Maisi is writing this. Based on his assumption, his presumption, that there had to have been Ruach HaKodesh that was shaira when the Ramah and the Mechaber were writing the Shulchan Aruch, B'meili you can't be chaylik on it and say kimli. So meaning it's the Tumim is learning halacha l'maisa. These svarim were Ruach Hakodesh, and you can't be chaylik on them in a certain way. Now, this is the Ruach Hakodesh that I'm talking about from these Gemaras, from these Rishonim, from these examples, where there's a Ruach Hakodesh that allows a person to achieve a certain level of clarity. That a certain level of clarity and mistake-free productivity. That's impossible. Nobody produces mistake-free productivity that can become halacha l'maisa every single time. That's the Ruach Hakodesh that's being described in these Gemaras. Now, the Chassam Sofer himself, actually, in a tshuva in Ohr Hachaim and Simon Reish Hey, in a tshuva that's written to the Maratz, who wrote about this extensively, and the Chassam Sofer, it's like a very scattered tshuva. It's like 30 different things that the Chassam Sofer discusses. In there, he says this explicitly. If I could find it in my pile here, I'd read it for you. But the Chassam Sofer says it explicitly that here it is. The Chassam Sofer says like this. He says like this. He brings the Ravid in Hilchos Sukkah that we refer to. He says, this doesn't mean Ruach HaKodesh that was like in previous days. I don't know why he chooses David HaMelech specifically, but I think the Maratz is talking about David HaMelech. That's why. Ein Ruach HaKodesh like David HaMelech v'chaveirav. Elahainu Ruach Hashem al oiskei Torah lishma asher zoichen l'chaven ha'emes. This is the Ruach HaKodesh that's Sheira on people who are Oisk B'Torah L'Shma, that they're Zoichen L'Chaven Emes. Afilum L'fi Tevach Chachmasam V'Sichlam Lo Yasigu Yedeim. Even if, according to their own natural inborn talents, they would not be able to achieve this type of perfection, this type of thought. So this HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mikal Makam HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Chasdai, Yahiv Chachmasa L'Chakima L'Fi Shah. He gives them certain, like a blick of Ruach HaKodesh, here and there, as needed, to allow them to come to the shleimus, to understand the Torah that they're learning in. So this Chassam Sofer says it very explicitly that the Ruach Hakodesh that's being discussed in these Gemaras and that's being discussed in the Ravid and these Rishonim is like the Tumim says, is the Ruach Hakodesh of Oiskei Torah, of Lemdei Torah, who need to be Yored L'Omko Shel Din, who have to get it exactly right, and that's almost impossible. And they have a Ruach Hakodesh. Now, give me 5 more minutes. We'll wrap this up, okay? I know it's late already. I'm sorry. Let's get to the Ruach HaKodesh the other time, the more popular kind, the cooler kind, yeah? Let's get to the other kind of Ruach HaKodesh. So, interestingly, I'm going to read from Chaim Kanievsky in Orchos Yosher, who has a whole chapter on this, and it's a mess, meaning he blends every kind of Ruach HaKodesh into it without putting them into categories. So, seemingly, he holds they're all applicable and they all come from these Gemaras, meaning if you're trying to narrowly tailor it, it's hard to see this, but he blends everything together. And I just realized I never even went back to the V'chaim. We have to go back to the V'chaim. What did it say? Yeah, we have to go back to the V'chaim. We might have to break this into 2 pieces. Let's go back to the V'chaim. We might have to break up the second type of Ruach HaKodesh into another week. Let's go back to the V'chaim first because that's what we're doing here. Back to the V'chaim. The V'chaim has the Shaila. Let me read the Shaila again. Shaila says, Melamed echad, paga b'chvei da Ohr Hachaim, v'amash le'asa sefer Ruach HaKodesh. He said that they didn't write a sefer Ruach HaKodesh. Zak tshuva, kibalti mechtavchem. He said, I don't know what type of suffix you're talking about. Of course, the Gemara he brings that Ruach HaKodesh is Sheira on someone who's Roy Lekach in our Dar too. He says, he quotes the Ramban and Baba Basra, who learns this explicitly, that the Ruach HaKodesh is being discussed in the Gemara and Baba Basra of that was taken away from the Nevi'im and given to the Chachamim is Ruach HaKodesh. And learning, he says, he brings, fine. Then he says, he brings another Gemara in Gittin, where the Gemara says clearly, brings a medrash, he brings all the rayas, and then he says, Umasha Amru, this that they said, the Yemais Nevi'im nitla Ruach HaKodesh, Hainu Ruach de Nevuah, Av Ruach HaKodesh de Chachma. He says, what was taken from them was the Ruach HaKodesh of Nevuah, but Ruach HaKodesh de Chachma, lehaskim b'sichleim halach l'mesh Sinai, to be zeicha, to be maskim with your seichel, like halach l'mesh Sinai, oikir of Yasser, zel le'batla v'le'yakrish ze'rak apikaris. That type of Ruach HaKodesh that was given to Chachmei HaTorah, to be able to understand the Torah b'shleimus and to be zeicha to proper kavanah in the Torah, that was never taken away, and anyone who's makrish that is an apikaris. U'masha kasavtem, chuvas migdeli dereinu, Shabbat legamri. Gedeli dereinu could only mean very few people. The Rechaim didn't call a lot of people Gedeli dereinu. L'chayr it means Rav Shlomo Kluger. Mashik has have to migdal the reinu get the Shabbat legam Ruach Hakodesh. Lo ya'amin sheyatzeh min pi Rabbi Seinu sheyichye u'mi yedei mashikasav lehem hama'ata anavel hazeh. Now we'd rather know mashikasav lehem. We know what the shayl to the shayl Meshav to Rav Shlomo Kluger was, and to me it would seem there is no machlekes over here. Meaning Rav Shlomo Kluger of course would agree that this Ruach Hakodesh is Sharon Lim the Torah. The fight was given over, so to speak, in much more detail, and it was explained to Rav Shlomo Kluger that this was being used as like a tool to be mevatel and mezalzel in Meseira and say we're just hiding behind Ruach Hakodesh of all sorts and everything, and they were pushing back on that. And Rav Shlomo Kluger probably had a little bit more context to the tshuva than the Ohr Hachaim was going with, and likely in my mind there was no machlekes, because these are what the Ohr Hachaim is bringing is pretty basic gemaras that Rav Shlomo Kluger obviously knew too, and this is a. Anyhow, he writes this. The truth is, the Ohr Hachaim himself is writing that it's hard to know exactly what the back and forth with the Rav Shlomo Kluger was. So I'm agreeing. It's hard to know exactly. We know a little bit more. We still don't know what the Rav Shlomo Kluger's truth was. We know a little bit more, and likely there was no machlekes at all. Aval emes ad l'darkei says shegam bizmanenu yesh l'chachmei emes she'enim noitin acharei hachaymer. There are chachmei emes who don't chase gashmias. Yesh them ruach hakodesh gevur b'meir b'ramban behedya. Ulchein he says bal Ohr Hachaim hakadosh bevadai chiber sefer b'ruach hakodesh. Any mechaber, even in our dar, if he's royal lekach, he's mechaber a sefer the Ruach Hakodesh. What do I mean? The Hainu qualifying that means he was zeicha to be maskim with his God-given intellect to the chachmas haTorah, which Amr B'Shasar Rav Yasser. So writes the Urim V'Tumim that we quoted, Halacha L'Maisa, Shein Lahimar Kimli Neged HaShulchan Aruch, which Shekhasu Devreim Ruach Hakodesh. He says, "Hamalamed Hamachish Ruach Hakodesh Ohr Hachaim Hakadosh V'Apikairis Shein Mamim Gedei Le'adar." He's not mamim in the Gedei Le'adar. Sheidu Aleim Sheiroi Ruach Hakodesh, and therefore should be fired. But he says, what you owe him, Ach Schar Malamdusay Lo Yuchal Lifsek. The Ohr Hachaim says, by the way, back pay in the chayvis. That I'm not saying to take away from him, but this is the truth of the Ohr Hachaim. I would say fully in context of exactly what the shaila was and what the chazals that he's going off on are. Now, I wanted to get to also the second type of Ruach HaKodesh, just like general Ruach HaKodesh. Like I think we're going to have to save that. Mitzvah Shem next week.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.